Win totals are updated, at least the projections are, so we can gamble it. And that makes today some Wednesday wagers on the podcast daily. That is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. And Bill said, hey, guess what? There are some over-unders on season win totals. Let's look at Ohio State's opponents, figure out what that means for their schedule and how tough it is, and also a chance to get rich.
That's right. Who doesn't love to get rich? Yeah. It's hard. Like I would almost be hesitant this time of year. Although I'd imagine win totals don't move all that much, but some of these are like pretty interesting that I kind of do want to bet on them. And others I feel like I want to wait to see if the number goes down because they seem kind of high. But yeah, we always love an opportunity to make some money.
So for the purpose of this exercise, I haven't looked at them. Bill has the envelope sealed. They are all of the current and up-to-date win totals over under for all 12 Ohio State opponents this year. I went through all of their schedules one by one, not knowing what the number was, and arrived at what I thought their record would be with the minimum amount of research possible. Just picking wins and losses and scribbling in the notebook. For the second day in a row on the podcast daily, I actually have notes to refer to. In June, I don't know what's going on either, but they're here and the scribbles are all down. So where are we starting, Bill?
I guess let's just run through it sort of chronologically, and let's start with those Akron Zips. I'd love to know what you think Akron's going to do this year.
Well, we spent a lot of time breaking down their quarterback situation, and I learned nothing about it. I scribbled down 2-10 question mark.
Nice. You're about on it. So these are all from DraftKings, by the way. The win total for Akron is 3.
Yeah, I'm under.
Yeah, I think you might be right with the under there. I was looking at some other stuff. ESPN has its MAC preview out already, and Akron is last, in their projections for the MAC. So this is quite possibly the worst team in the MAC coming to Ohio Stadium for the season opener, which should be a nice little tune-up for the Buckeyes, but also could get pretty ugly, I think. But yeah, this is not a very good football team that Ohio State's going to be playing in the opener.
It's not. And at the risk of skipping too far ahead to actual analysis, I think the notion that we have that Ohio State has a 3 or 4 game schedule, which is probably not inaccurate, but it being considered a soft schedule, I think is based on 3 pretty soft non-conference games. The deeper you get into the actual schedule and Big Ten opponents, I found myself talking into being at a little bit tougher road for the Buckeyes than maybe we've thought for the previous 6 months. Maybe that's just because we're getting closer and it's talking about football, and some teams had better springs or different roster moves that maybe make them more intriguing than before. But when I was looking at the first 3 here, I thought, well, that's why everyone looks at this and it's the first month is a tune-up.
Yeah, and I think so Western Michigan is the second game. What did you have for their record?
I have them at 6-6, and they are another team that got a big question mark. I have a lot more actual opinions about the schedule when it comes to the Big Ten teams. And I think the toss-up was actually Western Michigan playing Marshall. Somebody has to win it. I have them at 6-6.
Yeah, so that again, you're right on it. It's 6.5 is the number there. They were picked to finish 4th in the MAC, or not 4th in the MAC because MAC has divisions, but by SP Plus, the 4th best team in the MAC. So that's a team, I guess, with an outside shot of maybe getting to the MAC championship. But this is I think most years when Ohio State plays MAC teams, they tend to avoid the class of the MAC that year. There have been some times, I think in 2019 maybe, that Miami Ohio team that Ohio State beat 70-7 ended up being a pretty good MAC team.
Yeah.
And obviously the PJ Fleck Western Michigan team they beat a couple of years ago was a pretty good team. But these 2 MAC opponents, Akron and Western Michigan, one is probably mid-pack and one stands to probably finish last. And I thought that when Ohio State first added Marshall to the schedule, I thought oh, that could be kind of interesting because I think Charles Huff is a good coach, and maybe that's a bit of a program on the rise, but they are likewise kind of projected to be a middle of the pack team in the Sun Belt. So what did you have for their record?
I have them at 6-6 as well.
Yeah, again, it's 6.5. So you know what you're doing.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see, because I might have some opinions that are way too high of some of the teams that we're about to get to.
Well, yeah, I guess we will. There's some interesting teams there. So those are the three kind of bye game openers: Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall. Let's move to the next one, which is at Michigan State in the fourth game of the season. What do you have there?
I think that schedule for Michigan State is a little bit more manageable than I would have guessed. Today, which is Wednesday, was the first time that I think I've probably looked at Michigan State's schedule. So I won't pretend like I thought that 6-6 was within reach for them, but that's where I got.
I mean, so yeah, they open with Florida Atlantic, at Maryland, Prairie View A&M, and at Boston College before they play Ohio State in East Lansing. So they could be 4-0, right? Going into that game. The win total's 5. So you'd be on an over there. I think I would be on an over there too. Michigan State has lost a decent amount on defense and wasn't particularly good on defense to begin with. But they might have enough offensively to kind of like be interesting. So I thought five probably makes sense, but 5 is like enough for me that I almost want to jump on that a little bit, because I likewise see a path to 6 wins for them. Like, I think it could be not like a very good debut season for Jonathan Smith, but one that they're not in the basement of the Big Ten and maybe they're a bowl team in year 1.
Yeah, I don't think they have any chance, barring Mark D'Antonio style weather command against Ohio State and getting something truly wonky, which at that time of year, hopefully Ohio State, for their sake, is able to avoid that. I don't think that they, Burnham has talked about throwing out the record in their rivalry, big brother, little brother situation. I don't really think that they can be all that competitive with Michigan, despite some of the things that I've said about the Wolverines and their record. But the teams that line up for them at home are pretty winnable opportunities. If they get a little bit of better coaching boost here, again, the roster's in transition, and it's hard to know exactly what they're going to look like the later in the year that as it progresses. But yeah, I was surprised, because I thought this could be a difficult year for them, but there's a schedule that they might be able to sidestep that a little bit.
I think you're right. I think it could be like a better kind of year 1 stepping stone than people first realized. Iowa, which is, I think, another very interesting opponent. That game is here in Columbus the week after Michigan State. What do you have on Iowa's record?
So I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks in this conversation about, fast forwarding to the Oregon game. I do think that Iowa, particularly because of their defense, makes for a physical, difficult matchup for anybody. That includes Ohio State. Hawkeyes are not going to score. If that game is primetime with alternate jerseys and that whole deal, the way it looks like it's shaping up, like, Ohio State's not going to lose that game. But I think Iowa's better than they're getting credit for a lot. I don't know what the win total is, so I don't know what Vegas thinks, but I think there's a path to 10-2. And at Minnesota is the game that I think is the biggest hang up for that potentially for them. So I have them like 9-3 at worst, question mark. But I don't know what the number is, so that would influence where I would want to be. But their schedule is also pretty favorable.
So I'll tell you the number in a second, but I'll say this too. On Kings of the North, we have our playoff picks coming later this week, like our updated playoff picks. And like Doug has been on this, Iowa has an outside chance to get into the playoff kick for a little bit. I think only because he sees, like you, a path to perhaps getting 10 wins. And I can like kind of see it too. But even if I can't, I'm still taking the over on 7.5.
Oh, whoa. How quickly? Hold on a second. Where's my phone? Oh, my.
Seems pretty low, right?
For one of the better defensive programs in the country? Yeah, I think so. And, I'm glad that Vegas hasn't taken a look at that schedule quite yet.
I actually want to look up. I should have looked this up before we started the show. Like how many times Kirk Ferentz has had 7 wins or fewer. I can't. Feels like the floor at Iowa is typically higher than that.
It feels like a once every 5 years or so situation.
Okay, so this is like going back from last year. 10-4, 8-5, 10-4, 6-2 in the COVID year when they only played 8 games. 10-3, 9-4, 8-5, 8-5, 12-2, 7-6, 8-5. They haven't had a losing season since 2012 when they were 4-8, and they haven't hit an under. I guess this is regular season wins, right? The bowl games don't count, so there have been a few 7-win regular seasons in there, but not enough for me to like feel that this is a right number for Iowa based on this schedule. Like I think Iowa's a pretty good team. They're Iowa, but they're like a good version of Iowa.
But last year has to represent rock bottom for them offensively. Like even if they never become an explosive offensive team, which spoiler alert, they will not. At least not as long as Kirk Ferentz is alive. They're still going to play high level defense. They have a manageable schedule. They don't embarrass themselves. And getting to 7.5 wins, I think that's got to be the safest bet of anything I might have had on here scribbling down on this notebook.
I think if I say to you, I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible that at the end of the year, we say the best defense Ohio State played this year was Iowa in the 5th game of the season.
I'm not ruling that out.
Right. I mean, like Penn State will have a good defense. Michigan obviously have a good defense. Oregon will have a good defense, but I don't know. Iowa's could be better than all of them.
They're going to have less flash. They're going to have less NFL draft talk about them, most likely, but we'll look back.
They kind of only lost Cooper DeJean. Like they kind of returned everybody else,
which really they were already, which they were already dealing with that at times last year, and they didn't really miss a beat. Like they're incredibly well coached on defense, and if they get even a modicum of improvement on offense, they're going to be pretty dangerous, but not enough to outscore Ohio State, but enough to play a really competitive game and maybe score on defense like they did against CJ Stroud a couple years ago.
Yeah, that is the thing that's hard to get out of your mind. It's like when they played Iowa a couple years ago, I don't think Ohio State played particularly well. Iowa's defense was still pretty good that year, and like Ohio State still ended up blowing their doors off, right? I don't think that Iowa this year will be nearly as bad as they were offensively that year. And I think they will be even if they're significantly improved from last year, they could still only be like a middle of the pack offense in the country. So like I'm not saying Iowa's going to come out and rattle off 40 points against Ohio State, but they could score a touchdown or two, I think, and perhaps make it a not an interesting game, but I still think like one of the tougher games in Ohio State's schedule without question, and actually like a game that I could see being pretty important for Ohio State when it comes to seeding. If Ohio State doesn't end up running the table, or winning the Big Ten championship, and it's not one of those top 4 seeds, like I feel like a win against Iowa will end up being a pretty good feather in their cap, because I think Iowa will be flirting with 9-10 wins next year or this year.
Agreed. Bottom line is I don't think you can skip through straight to week 6.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then week 6 is the Oregon game. Tell me your record first, and I'll tell you the win total.
I think Oregon is going to finish 10-2, and I don't really know. I think they will beat either Michigan or Wisconsin, but probably not both on the road.
I think it's fair.
I know that they're very good, not disputing that, but they have a tricky road schedule the later in the year that you get there that I think could be problematic for them. And they also didn't get any favors with a Friday night trip to West Lafayette the week after playing Ohio State, which I'm not putting them on any kind of upset alert, but it does sum up the fact that they've got some unique challenges on their schedule coming from Eugene this year.
It is not an easy schedule. And I like Oregon also lost like its 3 best offensive players, right? And they've done a nice job of filling those holes, I think, both in recruiting high school guys who are ready to step up and obviously in the transfer portal, particularly a quarterback. But like, I think it's possible that Oregon is slightly worse than they were last year. So I can see a 10-2, 10.5 is the number, which is actually the same win total as Ohio State and a third team in the Big Ten that we will talk about in a second. But I would probably, I just wouldn't touch it, to be honest, but because the schedule is that tough, like I could see, I think it's either 10-2 or 11-1. I don't think Oregon's going to go 12-0 this year. But obviously it's an incredibly tough game for Ohio State either way. Like probably, I don't know, given the caliber of opponent, because I don't think Penn State, even though it's tough to play on the road, has been maybe as talented as this Oregon team is. So, like, if you take away the Michigan games, this is probably the toughest road game Ohio State's had maybe since, I don't know, they had to go to Oklahoma in 2016, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also doing this exercise, since we're talking about Ohio State, Oregon, the tiebreaker situation could be pure madness to get to Indianapolis. Like, I know I've been a pretty big proponent of doing away with divisions, but it turns out when you have 18 teams with not everybody coming even close to playing everybody, you're probably facing some messy situations. And I wrote down 10-2 for both Iowa and Oregon and another team that could get to 10-2, although I'm not all that confident about it. That would be messy.
Yeah, it could be quite messy. It'll be fun, I think, to talk about, but it'll be messy and drive people crazy, I think. The next game so I thought Iowa and this next game are maybe the two most interesting games on the schedule, in terms of, like, you don't exactly know what it's going to be, but it could end up being like a little bit more intriguing maybe than we're giving it credit for at the moment. That is Nebraska. What did you have for Nebraska's record looking at their schedule?
Their schedule seemed a little more daunting and manageable. I just don't think Nebraska is going to be very good. I'm not a believer in Matt Rule. There are like enough opportunities. It's like, yep, I don't even have to think twice. They're going to win that game. And then there were a lot of them that was like, boy, I really don't know. Are they going to be a dramatically improved quarterbacked team? What does their defensive talent look like? I don't know. And I put them at 7-5. And for this, I wrote at best.
So the number 7.5. And it is a weird schedule, because I actually think when Nebraska comes to Ohio Stadium on October 26th, that they're going to be undefeated and ranked.
Yeah.
But then I also think they might not win another game the rest of the year.
And then it does one of those off the side of a cliff.
Yeah. Like, which is like, if they win their first, what's that, 7 games, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, they could be bowl eligible by the time they come to Ohio State, and like Matt Rule getting Nebraska bowl eligible in his second year, I think would be a nice step forward for the program. But like, they play at Ohio State, then they play UCLA in Lincoln. They can maybe beat UCLA in Lincoln. Then they got to go at USC against Wisconsin and home, and then at Iowa to end the year. Yeah, so they could be like unbeaten and like number 13, I think, when they come to Ohio Stadium, which we've seen before from Nebraska. Right? It was at 2016, the night game here was like Nebraska was like number 9 in the country, and Ohio State beat them like 1,000,000-0.
Yeah.
So I think that is probably in the cards for this game as well. It's not that I think like Nebraska is going to give Ohio State a run for its money, but I think there's a very good possibility of that being pumped up as like a huge game. And then Ohio State reminds everybody how good they are and how easy Nebraska's schedule was up until that point.
We call that a Mel Tucker.
It's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's probably the only way you want to be compared to Mel Tucker. Actually, that's not even true. You don't want to be compared to him that way either, but there are worse ways, I suppose.
There's no good way. They're mostly bad.
Yeah. All right. The next game is at Penn State. What did you think of the Nittany Lions schedule?
I tend to give James Franklin the benefit of the doubt that he's going to beat everybody on schedule except top 10 teams.
Yep.
And I think like Penn State is fine. They're recruiting at the same level, but they're just fine. I don't think that they're good enough. And the enhanced depth of the Big Ten, I think, hurts James Franklin and Penn State more than anybody else. So I do think that Ohio State is going to win that game in Happy Valley. And I think that puts Penn State's ceiling at 9-3 at best. And I picked them to go 8-4.
Wow. That would be James Franklin goes 8-4.
Well,
you better find a realtor.
That he should have found one 4 years ago.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
That stretch, again, there is an off week built in, but at USC, at Wisconsin, and then against Ohio State, like, I think they're probably going to lose all of them. And even if you give them 2 out of 3, it doesn't get a lot easier for them. They're more talented, but back-to-back against Purdue and Minnesota is no walk in the park in November. So again, like, Penn State usually handles those situations. Like, they beat the teams that they're supposed to. James Franklin usually does that. I wonder if some of that quote unquote magic is about to run out on him. And
Interesting.
I don't know where you're at, but I'm not sure that schedule works that well for them the later in the year that they get.
I'm on the other side of that. I think like I actually think if Penn State opens at West Virginia on the road, it's a 12-point favorite in that game, which I was a little surprised by because I think West Virginia can win that game. I think if Penn State wins that game, it's looking at not an easy road to 11-1, but I think a workable road to 11-1, which is actually like I had Penn State with that record in our playoff. I'm spoiling our playoff predictions, but there's more to it than just the 2 picks I've given away already. I have Penn State at 11-1 in our playoff picks, and I think like a 7 seed if I remember correctly in those projections. So I would be taking the over. If you're 8-4, the number's 10.5.
Yeah,
that's the third team that was a 10.5. It's Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State.
Yeah, I thought because I wrote 8-4, and then I thought, well, 9-3 is well within the realm of possibility. But I thought that was the ceiling for them, and maybe that's James Franklin. Too much skepticism. I've had that, in my blood for a very long time, and usually that's been proven correct. And I also I know that players get better in college. Seen that a million times. I know that it's true. You get older, you get better, you get more experience. I watched Drew Aller play last year in the Horseshoe, and I was mortified by what I saw. So maybe that's all out of his system, but it's also hard for me to understand how that could be with still Julian Fleming hops over there and he is suddenly their best weapon at wide receiver. I'm not sure that scares Ohio State any. I mean, and look at the rest of that schedule, the tougher teams, the tougher defenses. I just don't. Is Drew Aller going to go out and be able to win games by himself, or with him and Julian Fleming and Katron Allen? I mean, I don't know. I don't think so.
No, I think those are all fair questions. I think it's more about their new offensive coordinator, Andy Koltenicky from Kansas. Like, I think he'd be the one that has to go win those games for Penn State and put Drew Aller in comfortable spots. Because I agree with you, he was not very impressive last year. He had a bad spring game too, for whatever that's worth. So I can see it. I could see. I don't know if I can see an 8-4. I can see a 9-3. I can see anything between 9-3 and 11-1. I don't think Penn State's going to beat Ohio State. That's not. I don't have that as a win in my projection. That's the one loss that I have. But Penn State doesn't play Michigan this year, and at the moment, I think Penn State is better than USC and Wisconsin, which are probably its next 2 toughest games, and West Virginia. So I don't know. It's an odd schedule that in that it's a little hard to predict. But the number is 10.5, and actually, I looked up the conference championship odds. Ohio State was plus 160, Oregon is plus 210, and Penn State is third at plus 500. So there's a little bit of a gap there, but it's not super wide. Michigan's next at plus 600, and then it drops to USC at plus 2200. So people think pretty highly of Penn State going into the season.
Penn State fans
do. Yeah.
Well, maybe I don't know. They don't.
Yeah.
They're with me on James Franklin, aren't they?
They definitely will be if he goes 8-4. that's for sure. I think that's a guarantee. The next 2 games are kind of stinkers. Purdue and Northwestern in Chicago. Actually, the next 3 are probably stinkers. So it's Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana. We'll lump them all together. What did you have on those records? And I'll give you the win totals.
I have Purdue going 5-7 at best. I'm sorry for your guy. You cast your lot with the wrong head coach there, I think. I
think I might have. Yeah.
I'm not on board there. I have Northwestern. I had to think about it a lot because they were so much more feisty a year ago. And I wonder if this, their home games playing in their practice facility in what I'm sure is going to be the windiest stadium in the history of college football for the duration of the season. I wonder if that'll provide some weird, wacky outcomes. I have them going 5-7. They certainly vastly exceeded that mark were a much better team a year ago. I don't know if that's sustainable. Maybe it was a bit of a unique situation with motivation and new coach. And I don't know. I think there'll probably be a little bit of regression there. In Indiana, I think is a bad football team who's going to have a better record than either of those two teams, and I have them at 6-6.
Yeah, I think of those three, Indiana is the one that I would project to be a bowl team. If they're not, that would be, I think, Kurt Cignetti's first losing season ever as a head coach anywhere he's been, which would be interesting to see how he reacts to that because he's not afraid to speak his mind. So the Purdue's win total is 4.5. Northwestern's win total is 4.5. Indiana's is 5. So the win-loss projections are in Indiana's favor as well. I don't think. I was out there on Purdue last year. I've backed off of that significantly now. Northwestern, I think probably stands to regress a little bit because I think there was an emotional component to what they did last year. But I think they play 5 games in that weird like makeshift stadium, and then they're playing 2 games at Wrigley Field. One of them against Ohio State, the other against Illinois. So like that's an advantage, I think, on some level. They can maybe get another win or two they don't actually deserve because of wonky home field conditions. I think Wisconsin has to go play on that patch of turf with bleachers, so that'll be interesting to see. But I do think of as it pertains to Ohio State, I don't think any of these 3 teams is like remotely dangerous. But I guess maybe having to go play at Wrigley Field is maybe the wild card there.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about like weird, I don't know, playoff selection committee tiebreakers, things like that, like Ohio State will be wanting one of these 3 teams to get to bowl eligibility and like make the schedule look a little bit better and boost up the win percentage. But if they all go 5-7 at worst, that's not a terrible outcome for them in terms of strength of schedule.
Yeah. All right, and then the last one. What do you think of the Wolverines schedule?
Yeah, so that conversation that we had a few weeks ago when we had a Freaky Friday notebook about which was more likely a national title for the Buckeyes or 8-4 for Michigan, like I still think that 8-4 is a distinct possibility for Michigan because I'm so uncertain about their offense. And I've had it in my mind that the teams on the schedule make it really difficult, but where those games are should maybe help Michigan. Like when you go game by game, it became harder for me to actually see them going 8-4. Like I know, when you look at USC and Oregon, it's like, well, I think I would have more confidence in those 2 programs in a neutral site right now, maybe certainly for Oregon, but having both of those in the big house that makes it harder to sit there in June and be like, oh, no, there's no chance they can't win them. So I don't think that Michigan can beat Texas, and I don't think that they're going to beat Ohio State. So I think the path to 10-2 is more feasible than I would have projected. I think there is room for them to be worse, depending on what happens for them at quarterback and with maybe the offense as a whole. But the defense is still going to be very good. And the schedule, while the names are really good on it, isn't as terrifying as it might seem.
Yeah, it is. It's good to remind people of that, I think, because I need reminding of it. It's like, yes, they're playing good teams in theory, but they're, with the exception of Ohio State, they're all in Ann Arbor. I am of a similar mind to you. Like, I don't think they're going to beat Texas, and I don't think they're going to beat Ohio State. I could see them winning the other 2 games. I think in the playoff picks, I had Michigan out of the playoff at 9-3 because I didn't think there was enough else on the schedule to get them in. Even if they lost like close games to Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas, I don't think like one good win against USC would be enough for them to overcome that. But the total is 9, so like the odds are kind of, I think, thinking similarly to us. Like you can see, I don't think anything between 8-4 and 10-2 would shock anyone. Like I think anything more than 10-2 might be a little shocking based off how much the roster has turned over and losing Jim Harbaugh, but. 8-4, I think, is on the table. I wouldn't pick it. I'd go between the 2, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's the window. I can't really talk myself into more than 10. And even with the questions I have for them, like 8 seems like the floor. So that here having it right at 9 is kind of surprising that there's no hook either way. Because to me, that means there's no way to bet it. I would just stay away from it. And that means like we only had 2 for me that seem like no-brainers that I must bet immediately, which would be Iowa, which has got to be the easiest bet anyone can make. And feel free, we'll play this one back in November and maybe look foolish, but And if Penn State is at 10.5, the same as Ohio State, I really can't get there on them. So I would have an under on Penn State that seems like an easy one, and an over on Iowa.
Yeah, I would definitely have an over on Iowa. I might stay away from the rest of it. Other than I would take an over on Ohio State at 10.5. I think Ohio State could lose once. I think Ohio State could lose at Oregon. But I have a really hard time seeing Ohio State losing more than one game this year. And even losing one is it's not hard to wrap your mind around, but I hesitate to project even that. So I would take the over on that as well. But I don't know. Maybe Indiana at 5. Can they get the bowl eligibility? I might look at that. But Iowa is very enticing at 7.5.
So what do I have here? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 bowl teams. So if that plays out, that schedule should work in Ohio State's favor when it comes to college football playoff selection and polls and all the other stuff. Maybe tiebreaker. I guess we'll see what kind of madness ensues there. But I think the notion that it's all down to 3 games, which has been a lot of the conversation, including from us in maybe January or February on the podcast daily, is probably a little bit misguided. I don't know what the S&P rankings or any of that other FPI, ESPN, whatever. I don't know where they have it right now, although it doesn't really matter. But because I'm projecting these win totals, and it looks like by the end of November, it should be a schedule that holds up a little bit of its weight. It's not going to be the hardest schedule in the country, but it's also not even going to be close to the worst.
No, I think it's when we first looked at it, I was like, "Whew, that schedule's kind of rough." And it's mostly the home games. There's really not a tremendous home game. Iowa is probably the best you're going to get. But I think it's a solid schedule, because I think while I'm with you on the Purdues and Northwesterns, I don't know if Purdue snuck up on somebody and got the 5 or 6 wins, or Northwestern did the same. I don't think I'd be shocked by that. So I think the number of bowl eligible teams that Ohio State plays this year could be darn near everyone they play except for Akron.
Yeah. I mean, that's the 9 I had there was because I have Purdue and Northwestern both at 5 and 7. If I think both of them play Wisconsin. So if one of them steals that game, you mentioned Northwestern hosting them in their practice facility on the lake. Who knows what's going to happen in that game?
Yeah. But anyway, let's all get rich on Iowa. 7.5.
That's it. That's the seal of approval. That's a Wednesday wager that I can tell you for sure. Bill and I are going to both rush off and make that. That was fun. I'm glad we did that. Hope you all enjoyed it, hanging out a little bit with us. We will be at the Woody on a Wednesday later on. We'll have some content as Ohio State kicks off recruiting camp season. So Berm will be down to point us in the right direction. He'll just tell me what to do, and then I will do whatever he says. And then afterwards, we'll talk about it either on the daily for Thursday or some snap judgments brought to you by Buyers Auto. Maybe both. We'll see. But more coverage and more ball talk is coming your way here. Thanks for joining us. He is Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. So long.